Welcome to our continuation of visiting our library, the stack of books that we usually refer to as the Bible. In the first 10 weeks of this visit to our library, we've identified some understandings that are essential to understand the library. And then we took 5 weeks to explore the Hebrew component of the library. And this week, we're going to take a look at the Apocrypha. Now, this is a group of 14 to 15 books which are not in the Hebrew library. They're not in the Christian Protestant library. Then why am I including the Apocrypha in the trip to our library? And that's because sometimes we need a broader vision than just our own Protestant Christian tradition. And we have to realize that there are three components of the Christian community: the Greek component, the Greek community within the Hebrew nation, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Eastern Orthodox Church considers these books of the Apocrypha to be scripture. Therefore, taking a week of summary and introduction to the Apocrypha helps all of us to bridge the gap between the Hebrew library, which contains no literature written after 200 BC, and the first writings of the Christian library in about 50 AD. So the Apocrypha, we take a look at it as a resource to bridge this gap, historical gap, of 250 years. Now, the word Apocrypha literally means things that are hidden. Now, why have these books been hidden? I guess my best description is that because these books did not fall within the drip line that was used by the Council of Jamnia in 90 AD to determine which books were going to be in the Hebrew library. Now the drip line is like an umbrella, and there's a drip line out here. And let's look again at that drip line to understand why Protestant Christians and the Jewish community do not consider these books to be scriptural. The drip line was, first of all, that only books written in Hebrew fell inside the drip line. Second, no books written after the beginning of the Maccabean rule in the Roman Empire fell within the drip line. And thirdly, only writings that represented the various traditions of the Hebrew people, which stood the test of time, fell within the drip line. The books designated as the Apocrypha fell outside the drip line and therefore are not included in the Hebrew library. Now, of greatest interest to those of us who take the trip to our library from the perspective of the Western world is that the first translation of the Old Testament written in Greek into Latin, the technical official language of the Roman Catholic Empire and the Roman Catholic Church, was a scholar by the name of Jerome. Now, in the first Latin book of the Old Testament, the separation that the Hebrew nation made, separating out these books of the Apocrypha, was honored. But from that first translation on, for 1,000 years, every Latin version of the Old Testament or Hebrew library included the Apocrypha. So for 1,000 years, the Latin versions of the Old Testament or the Hebrew library, the Latin version included the Apocrypha as scriptures. In other words, for 1,000 years, the legitimacy of the Hebrew library was forgotten. When the Protestant Reformation took place after those 1,000 years, many efforts were made to symbolize the movement away from the understanding of faith in the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic in the Roman Empire that had been the norm for 1,000 years. So the Protestant community, the part of the Reformation, wanted to create distance between what they were over against, what they were protesting against. So the Protestant tradition recaptured the wisdom of the Council of Jamnia, the Hebrew nation in 90 AD, saying, no, these books are outside the drip line. So in the willingness of the Protestant movement to create distance from the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic Empire, the Protestant Church recaptured the decision of the Hebrews and honored the Hebrew library without the Apocrypha. Now, let's just quickly look at the components of the Apocrypha. Because when you read it, you have to realize that there's 5 different types of books in the Apocrypha. One of the sections is historical writings. One of these books, Second Maccabees, has been described by scholars as pathetic history. Now, pathetic is a Greek word describing the reliance on imagination rather than the accuracy of evidence. So, such a description of episodes of history fell outside the drip line in the Council of Jamnia in 90 AD because the history was pathetic, full of imagination as well as facts. Then we have moralistic novels in the Apocrypha. Susanna is the best illustration of this literature. It's a great detective novel, but not a writing which stood the test of truth over time. Therefore, it fell outside the drip line. Then there's the wisdom literature. The Ecclesiasticus is very similar to one of the 13 writings in the Hebrew Bible, Proverbs. But to include it would be repetitious and suspect because Ecclesiasticus of the Apocrypha was not written in Hebrew. It fell outside the drip line. Then you have devotional books. The prayer of Manasseh is a prayer of the highest order, but it's simply a footnote to the book of Psalms, not written in Hebrew, so it fell outside the drip line. And finally, apocalyptic. This includes literature which reveals the last days of human existence. Second Esdras is a book in the Apocrypha that is apocalyptic, but repeats the worldview already in the 13 writings of the Hebrew Bible, that is, the book of Daniel. Was not written in Hebrew, was repetitious to Daniel, and therefore fell out the drip line. Now, it's important to note that the Apocrypha does not include any prophetic literature. Prophetic literature being the history of preachers through whom God spoke. From the perspective of the Council of Jamnia in 90 AD, the voice of God had not really been heard for 200 years. Let me repeat that. According to the Council of Jamnia in 90 AD, the voice of God had not been heard for at least 2 centuries. Therefore, these books are not scripture. But because reading and studying these books can provide an understanding of the religious, social, and cultural and political life which existed before, during, and following the life and teachings of Jesus, to refuse to read and study these books limits our ability to fully understand both the Hebrew and the Christian components of our library. Again, the Apocrypha is not scripture. It's an adjunct resource to understand the rest of our library. Now that is a lot of information that might be new, but it's essential to remember because for some components of the Christian community, these books are scripture, but not according to our Protestant understanding of faith, which relies on the judgment of the Hebrews to determine the books in the Hebrew library. Couple questions for your thought and or conversation. First of all, is this understanding of the Apocrypha helpful or disturbing to you in your trip to the library? Secondly, what other actions besides refusing to consider the Apocrypha as scripture took place during the Protestant Reformation, which continue today and symbolize the distinction between the practices and beliefs of the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant community? I hope this new information is helpful to you as we try to understand our library. Thank you.